Hey everybody, welcome to episode 101 of the Askdap Show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about MK7 Golf R versus Audi RS3, 2.0T TSI Cam Bridge screens missing, and noises after an intake install.
Will via Facebook says, do you always find the part of the cam bridge screens that go missing? Just replaced mine. I didn't see any of the pieces that have fallen out. The car ran fine before and runs fine now. Just curious where the parts go. Thanks.
Okay, so what Will is referring to is actually on 2.0T TSI engines. He actually sent a picture, so you can take a look here. That picture depicts where there is a screen for oil flow. It will break apart and oftentimes break off completely and become missing. And what this is for is this thing called the cam bridge. It goes on the timing side of the engine where the chains and the camshafts go, and it controls oil flow through specifically on the intake cam. So what will often happen is when that screen goes, it will then, obviously the screen will disappear. Oftentimes it goes into that intake camshaft, which can be a problem. Intake cam is hollow, so oil does run through it. Issue being that you won't be able to necessarily find it, and there's no guarantee that it won't potentially cause a problem. So you know, you have kind of two options in these circumstances. If it's damaged, that doesn't seem to be too much gone. If the entire thing is missing and you're concerned that maybe it's going to block oil flow at some point, you're kind of forced to replace that intake camshaft, or maybe try to remove it and get the parts of it out. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to successfully do that or not. But that's generally what you do, is you can try to roll it and hope for the best. Hope you don't have any oil issues. You probably would end up with oil pressure, oil lights coming on, like for low oil pressure. But one potential problem that you could have is variable valve timing could be affected, because a lot of the variable valve timing in these engines is affected by oil flow. Part of the reason why TSI engines have issues around timing chain tensioner failure is because they are somewhat pressure driven. So if you have bad oil pressure to the tensioner, that could create problems as well. So I've heard of people having tensioner failures due to poor maintenance, which would clog up oil channels and stuff like that. So really you have a couple options. You can try to roll it, hope for the best, or replace that intake cam, which is not cheap. I think it's about 650 bucks right now. So I will link to that in the description, where you can check out the cam bridge as well as the intake cam. But the cam bridge actually has been updated to a newer version that seems like it's probably going to be less likely to have that particular issue around that screen.
Mike via email says, I have this weird intake noise. It sounds like a whine or a whistle on my MK7 GTI. In third gear and up on wide open throttle from 4,000 RPM to redline, it gives me intake harmonics. The best way to describe it is it sounds like a train horn. I have a CTS turbo inlet pipe and a custom fabricated intake. This happened back when I only had the engine intake on my car as well. I also made sure everything was tight and secured, but the train horn still exists, and I was wondering if there's any solution to this. I have a video of it below in case you want to have a listen. Thanks.
Okay, so let's go ahead and listen to that video that Mike sent over so we can try to get an idea of the noise he's referring to. Now, if you listen to that video, it's kind of a faint noise you hear, but you kind of hear a kind of a whine noise. Probably is the closest thing. This is actually pretty common, especially on cheap intakes. Part of the reason, this is why people say an intake is just a pipe and a stick. That's not actually true. There's a lot more R&D that goes into the people who make intakes than just a stick and a filter, or even the newer ones that are carbon fiber and whatever. You know, they look at flow dynamics and stuff like that, as well as obviously doing R&D to install it on the car, test it, see, kind of make sure everything works. Probably they're going to do some dyno runs to kind of check that, make sure, you know, there are some circumstances where you might try something and because of the flow dynamics it might actually lose power. Bottom line is, that is generally a symptom of low-end intakes. They're not going to have a lot of R&D behind them, and there's nothing you can do. That's just the harmonics of the way the air flows through the tube. This was actually common a while back on, I remember 2.0T FSI engines had some issues around this, and they were actually pretty prevalent as far as the noise. They would have like actual like honk, almost like what I would consider to be like a goose honk noise when you were at certain RPM. So your best options, to me, the way to verify this, take the intake off, put the factory one back on, see if the noise continues. I suspect it's guaranteed not to, and that should solve your problem. And then you can either choose to deal with it or get an intake that doesn't have that issue.
Mitch via email says, I currently own a 2017 GTI, but I'm looking into potentially trading it at the end of this year for either a facelift Golf R or the new RS3 sedan. I can't decide which vehicle is a better buy. I've only ever owned manual vehicles, so that this is a big deterrent for me in getting the Audi. But every time I hear the 5-cylinder TSI engine rev, I suddenly don't care as much that it's an automatic. If you had the choice of either vehicle, which would you own and why?
Okay, so Audi RS3 versus Mark 7 facelift Golf R. Both great cars. I don't know specifics about the facelift Mark 7 Golf R yet. I assume probably going to have similar power to the previous generation. So let's just say 300 horsepower. Audi RS3, 5-cylinder turbo, going to have 400 horsepower. To me, these cars are actually not even in the same realm or category because they're so far apart in cost. Mark 7 Golf R, roughly, let's say around 40 grand. The RS3 is going to be about 60. So if price is an issue and 20 grand price difference doesn't concern you, then to me, the RS3 is the clear choice. It's going to be a much cooler car, much more unique, more fun, obviously, because it does have more power. And then also tunability. That RS3 probably with some basic tuning is probably going to be close to around 500 horsepower. So you can make a serious monster in power for a limited amount of effort in that vehicle. Now, doesn't say anything about the Mark 7 and facelift Golf R, still a great car, but they're so far apart in cost, I'm not sure it's going to necessarily be a contest. Now, if it is for you, cool, but again, I would go down the road of the RS3, and actually, as we're going to be moving into more Audi stuff, we're going to be getting rid of this car and moving it into an Audi model. You know, one of the guys was talking about RS3s, and I would love to get an RS3, but unfortunately for me personally, making video around RS3 is going to be really limited because they're going to be not very common and not mainstream enough. So when we're selecting a model that we're going to be trying to pick something that's more mainstream and more reasonable for people to own, the RS3 is just one of those cars that I just don't think there's going to be enough of them out there for us to make sense with a lot of 5-cylinder stuff or either R&D or creating video content or stuff like that for 5-cylinder owners. It's just going to be something that's very niche as far as people who are looking to go down that road. So most likely we won't go with an RS3, although I would love to have one. It will probably be S4 related because 3.0T is much more mainstream right now. And yeah, so but again, if you do get that RS3, I'd love to hear about it, and tuning it would be awesome.
Hank via email says, does the 1.8T take the software upgrades like the 2.0 does, specifically the Sportwagen? Will it work well with remapping, or do other systems need to be rebuilt to handle the additional power, such as the brakes, suspension, turbo, or exhaust?
Hank didn't mention specifically what model he had. He said Sportwagen 1.8T, so I have to assume he has a Mark 7 Golf wagon or maybe an all-track possibly. Would the 1.8T handle power? So 1.8Ts actually make a good amount of power from software as well. You don't really need to upgrade anything else. The one thing I'll say is it really depends on what your goal is. You know, some people go mod crazy when they start modding cars, and some people just do the basic stuff. You know, once you get to a certain point, maybe you've tuned a bunch of cars and done a bunch of stuff and made cars into, you know, cars that were handled great, performed great, but maybe aren't as comfortable as you'd like. So you kind of, on your next model, you tend to dumb it down a little bit, make it pretty simple, tune, suspension, wheels, you know, maybe intake, exhaust, that's it. A lot of people go down that road a lot oftentimes. I kind of lean that direction as well. But I'll say that if you're modding a car and making more power out of it, it really depends on your driving style. But I would say almost certainly upgrading brakes is a pretty solid option because you want to make sure the car is going to stop well. From my experience, most of these cars are under braked if you use them for performance reasons, they're going to be under braked a little bit. So upgrading your brakes is going to get you a lot better. And then, you know, as far as power from there, it's all going to be incremental growth. So if you add an intake and you add a downpipe and you add all these small incremental growth, they're going to do something, but nothing's going to be as much as that tune right up front. So I would say yes, absolutely a tune. And Also, one note I want to make, because a lot of these models are new, and anybody who's watching, if you have a newer car and you're looking to know if there's software available, especially if either the car is rare, like for example GLIs when they came out back in 2012 when they changed over to the Gen 3 engines, they didn't have software for a long time. 17 model cars, because they changed some stuff, oftentimes won't have software right at launch. So we have a video that talked about checking the box code of your ECU. I will link to it here, you can check that out. But that's a really important factor when you're talking about tuning cars that are newer, because you have to make sure software is available before you do that. Because Uniconnect cables, unfortunately, once they're paired to a car, they're locked to that car. So they're not a returnable part. So if you buy a Uniconnect cable without having checked the software, you're now stuck with a cable that doesn't have software available yet. So I hate to have that happen. I always want to make sure we put out that video so specifically so people don't have that problem. So yes, absolutely tune your 180. I will also link 180 tune information in the description below. Thanks so much for watching episode 101 of the Askdap Show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. If you have any questions or comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.